Folakemi had always dreamed of living in a beautiful apartment after her NYSC. And when she finally moved into her new place, it exceeded her expectations. The apartment was spacious, well furnished, and located in one of the best estates in the city. She felt a sense of pride as she settled in, arranging her belongings and making the space her own. Everything seemed perfect until she noticed Mr. Abu. Mr. Abu lived next door. At first, he seemed harmless enough. He's an advanced man, probably in his early 60s. He's often seen sitting outside his apartment, lost in thoughts. Folakemi would catch glimpses of him when she left for work or returned home. Each time he sees her from afar, he will begin to smile sheepishly, with his eyes glued to her until she's no longer on sight. At first, she brushed it off as a friendly gesture, but as time goes on, the smile began to feel weird and unsettling. "Maybe he likes you," her friend Sherifat suggested during one of their phone calls. Folakemi laughed it off, but deep down, she felt a growing discomfort. She was new to the area, with no one to confide in, and the odd behavior of her neighbor irritated her. So one fateful night, Folakemi attended a friend's birthday party, losing track of time. When she finally left, it was already very late. The streets were very quiet. As she approached her apartment, she spotted Mr. Abu sitting in a dark corner outside his door, his face illuminated by the dim lights of a nearby street lamp. Immediately he sighted her, he started smiling and was moving close to her. And before she could process what was happening, she screamed and ran towards her apartment, slamming the door behind her. Her heart was racing. She leaned against the door, trying to calm herself. What is wrong with that man? Why did he have to scare me like that? The incident left her shaking, and she knew she had to confront him. The next morning, she decided to seek answers. She dressed up and walked to a nearby shop owned by Mr. Kunle. With concern on her face, she approached him. "Do you know anything about my neighbor, Mr. Abu?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mr. Kunle frowned, shaking his head. "I don't think I know him. Can you describe him?" Folakemi described Mr. Abu, but Mr. Kunle's confusion only deepened. Frustrated, she left the shop, feeling more isolated than ever. She resolved that the next time Mr. Abu smiled at her, she would confront him directly. Days passed and the pattern continued. Each time she left or returned home, Mr. Abu would be there, smiling that same weird smile. Finally, one afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore. She marched over to his door, her heart pounding in her chest. "Mr. Abu," she called out, her voice firm. "Why do you keep staring at me? It's really creepy." To her surprise, he didn't respond. He just stood there, smiling as usual, as if her words had no effect on him. She was boiling inside her. "This isn't funny. You need to stop." She was frustrated. She turned and stormed back to her apartment. She needed to know if anyone else had experienced this strange behavior. Gathering her courage, she approached a few neighbors in the hallway. "Do you know Mr. Abu?" she asked them. To her shock, they all looked puzzled. "He never smiles at us," one neighbor said. "He just sits outside minding his own business." The realization hit her like a cold wave. Why was he only acting this way towards her? The unease settled in her stomach like a stone. In a moment of desperation, she decided to call the police. Maybe they could help her figure out what was going on. When the officers arrived, they were skeptical but agreed to check on Mr. Abu. Folakemi led them to his door, her heart racing. As they knocked, Mr. Abu opened the door, still wearing that unsettling smile. The officers exchanged glances with confusion on their faces. One of the officers brought out his phone and shouted, "It's him!" Folakemi became confused and asked, "Do you know him?" The officer said yes, he's been declared missing for the past 7 months now, after the tragic death of his wife and daughter. Immediately, the officers called his family to come confirm if he's actually the one. When the family arrived, they were shocked to see him standing there alive but looking lost. They rushed to him, tears streaming down their faces, asking him where he had been. Mr. Abu, however, continued to point at Folakemi, his eyes wide with a mix of recognition, desperation and sorrow. The police were baffled, exchanging confused glances as they tried to make sense of the situation. Folakemi stood frozen, her mind racing. Why was he pointing at her? What connection could she possibly have to this man and his tragic past? As the family gathered around, Mr. Abu's sister began to cry uncontrollably. "He thinks you are her," she sobbed, looking at Folakemi with a mixture of grief and disbelief. "You look just like his wife." Folakemi's breath caught in her throat. The realization hit her like a train. She had never met Mr. Abu's wife, but the resemblance must have been uncanny. The way he smiled at her, the way he watched her, it all made a horrifying kind of sense now. The police, still trying to piece together the story, turned to Folakemi. "Do you know anything about it?" the one officer asked, his tone serious. She shook her head. "No, I had no idea." As the family confronted Mr. Abu, who seemed to be in a daze, Folakemi felt a mix of emotions: fear, sympathy, and an overwhelming sense of guilt. She had been terrified of him, but now she understood that his behavior stemmed from a deep, unresolved grief. He had lost everything, and in her, he had seen a ghost of his past. With the help of the police, the family decided to take Mr. Abu back to their family house, hoping to help him regain his bearings. As they led him away, he turned back to Folakemi one last time, his expression softening. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Folakemi watched as they drove away, her heart heavy. She had wanted to confront the creepy neighbor, but now she felt a profound sadness for the man who had been lost in his own world of sorrow. The apartment that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt tainted by the shadows of the past. In the days that followed, Folakemi couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She often found herself glancing at Mr. Abu's empty apartment, wondering if he would ever return. The other neighbors continued their lives, but she felt a strange connection to the man who had once frightened her. Eventually, she decided to reach out to his family. She wanted to express her condolence and perhaps offer some support. When she met with them, they were grateful for her kindness, sharing stories of Mr. Abu's life before the tragedy. They spoke of his love for his family and how he had been a devoted husband and father. As they talked, Folakemi realized that she had the power to help him heal, even if it was just a small gesture. She offered to help with anything they needed, whether it was running errands or simply being there to listen. In that moment, she transformed her fear into compassion, understanding that sometimes the creepiest neighbors are simply people who lost in their own pain. Weeks later, Mr. Abu's family invited Folakemi to a small gathering to honor his late wife and daughter. It was a bittersweet occasion, filled with laughter and tears as they shared memories. Folakemi felt a sense of belonging, surrounded by people who understood the weight of loss. As she looked around the room, she realized that the creepy neighbor had become a part of her life, and in a way she never expected. She had turned a source of fear into an opportunity for connection, and in doing so, she had found a new sense of community in her new home. Now we have come to the end of another beautiful story. I hope you enjoyed this. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye for now.